Hello everyone, today we are going to be discussing about diabetic retinopathy. So first we'll have a basic idea about what is diabetes mellitus. So I have two types. Type 1 is insulin dependent diabetes mellitus and type 2 is non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. And why are we discussing about it here? It is because diabetic retinopathy is a significant cause of visual loss. So diabetic retinopathy is one of the microvascular complications which occurs in diabetes mellitus patients. The other microvascular complications which occur are neuropathy and nephropathy. So why do we need the differentiation between IDDM and NIDDM? Insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, which is type 1, and non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, which is type 2. So IDDM patients or type 1 patients are associated with an increased risk of retinal complications and they are prone to develop visual loss. Comparatively, the type 2 has got a lesser risk, but you are going to see more numbers of NIDDM patients or type 2 diabetic patients. So the numbers are more. So even though it's a less risk, you're going to see more number of patients with complications, right? So type 1, you have an increased risk of retinal complication and visual loss, but their numbers are relatively less. Whereas a type 2, even though they carry a lesser risk, you're going to see more number of patients in this group. So what is the epidemiology? In 15 years of patients who are having type 1 diabetes, 90% of them are going to develop a diabetic retinopathy, of which 25% is going to be a severe variety which is called as proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Whereas in type 2 patients in 15 years, 84% are likely to develop a diabetic retinopathy and they are likely to develop PDR in around 25 years. Whereas the incidence of macular edema is around 20% in both the groups. Both in type 1 and type 2, the incidence of macular edema is around 20%. And this macular edema is a very important cause for your visual loss. So it's a very important cause for a visual loss, almost accounting for about 75% of the visual loss causes for visual loss in diabetic retinopathy patients. So what is the pathology associated with diabetic retinopathy? So the first one is you have a pericyte loss. This pericytes regulates the tone of the capillaries and there is a loss of pericytes. In addition to that, you have a basement membrane thickening. There is also capillary occlusion because of the platelet aggregation and this leads to your microaneurysm formation. There is also associated loosening and proliferation of your endothelial cells. All these things are going to contribute to the diabetic retinopathy manifestations. So what is the pathogenesis for all these things? So whenever because of this pathological changes, what happens is there is a hypoxia induced. This hypoxia will favor release of a vascular endothelial growth factor. So the eye tries to overcome this hypoxia by releasing what is called as a vascular endothelial growth factor. Similarly, hyperglycemia also will favor release of a vascular endothelial growth factor. Okay, so what happens when a vascular endothelial growth factor is, there is an increase in permeability and also new vessel formation is there. This is called as neovascularization. So in the previous class you saw that new vessels were formed over the iris and also in the angle. So this is new vessels which are occurring in the retina and also when they occur over the iris and other things also it's a reaction to this only. So coming to the pathogenesis, there is hypoxia which favors release of vascular endothelial growth factor. Similarly, hyperglycemia also leads to vascular endothelial growth factor release. Vascular endothelial growth factor is responsible for increased permeability as also new vessel formation which is called as neovascularization. So VEGF is nothing but vascular endothelial growth factor which has been implicated in diabetic retinopathy. So coming to the classification, diabetic retinopathy is broadly classified into non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which is relatively less severe variety, and a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So in non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, the retinal changes are occurring without any proliferation, without any new vessel formation or neovascularization. Whereas in proliferative diabetic retinopathy, the fibrovascular proliferation is there into the vitreous, on the retina, on the optic nerve head or the optic disc. And in addition to this, you also have other features of diabetic macular edema, which is nothing but there will be deposition of hard exudates and it will be associated with retinal thickening. And I told you diabetic macular edema is one of the important causes for visual loss as far as diabetic retinopathy patients are concerned. So non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So what are the changes that you're going to see in a patient with non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy? You can see microaneurysms, which are nothing, which are seen as small red dots. You can see hemorrhages, which can be superficial or deep. So the superficial hemorrhages are going to be flame shaped, and they are present in the nerve fiber layer, whereas the deep hemorrhages are called as dot and blot hemorrhages. They'll have an appearance like a dot or a blot, ink blot kind of thing, and it is present in the inner nuclear layer. In addition to that, you can have hard exudates, which are waxy yellow appearing depositions with indistinct margins, and they can be present in clumps or in a ring pattern or a ring or a succinate pattern. And you also have cotton wool spots. These are called as soft exudates, but the term soft exudate is a misnomer because there are no exudates here. The cotton wool spots are nothing but nerve fiber layer infarcts. So the term soft exudate is actually a misnomer. In addition to this, you also have intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. So these are the predominant changes that you're going to see in a non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So this is a case of a mild diabetic retinopathy where you're able to see the small red dots, which are called as microaneurysms. So those microaneurysms can be seen. They are small red dots or microaneurysms. So in mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you're going to see only microaneurysms. And if you see, in addition to that, if you're going to see anything else, say if you're going to see along with microaneurysms, if you're going to see superficial hemorrhages, if you're going to see cotton wool spots, or if you're going to see hard exudates, then it is called as moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And then you have another classification which is called as severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. This obeys a rule which is called as 4:2:1 rule. So these are cotton wool spots here. You can see the microaneurysms, some hemorrhages here. So these are nothing but hard exudates in a round pattern, succinate pattern. It's present in the macula. This is diabetic macular edema. Again, succinate pattern of hard exudate deposition. So when you tell it as a severe diabetic retinopathy, you tell it as a severe diabetic retinopathy if it obeys a 4:2:1 rule, where you have superficial hemorrhage or hemorrhages in more than 20 in number in 4 quadrants, or if you have venous bleeding in any 2 quadrants, or IRMA in any 1 quadrant, it will classify. If you have any one of this, it's called as severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. If you have 2 or more changes, say you have got more than 20 hemorrhages in 4 quadrants and 2 quadrants of venous bleeding, then it is very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Or if you have IRMA in 1 and 2 venous in 1 quadrant, venous bleeding in 2 quadrants, again it is very severe. If you have any one of this feature, then it is a severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy is classified into mild, moderate, severe and very severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, where you have the basic changes. In mild variety, you have got only microaneurysms. Moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you got microaneurysms. In addition to that, you have other features like it can be hard exudates, it can be superficial hemorrhages, it can be dot blot hemorrhages, it can be soft exudates, any one of those. And severe, when they obey the 4:2:1 rule, more than 20 hemorrhages in 4 quadrants, venous bleeding in any 2 quadrants, or 1 quadrant with intraretinal microvascular abnormalities, otherwise known as IRMA. You can see the venous looping here. This is venous bleeding. See, venous bleeding is seen and it is present in more than 2 quadrants. But if you see the disc, there is also new vessels over the disc. So this qualifies as a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. I'm just coming to it. In the next few slides, I'll explain proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So when you tell it is a proliferative diabetic retinopathy, when you have new vessels or neovascularization over the disc, you just saw it in the previous picture, or neovascularization elsewhere away from the disc, in the elsewhere anywhere in the retina. So it can be neovascularization of the disc, it can be neovascularization of the retina. When you have a pre-retinal or a vitreous hemorrhage, or when you have fibrovascular proliferation which goes to a tractional retinal detachment, which can move on or progress to tractional retinal detachment. All these things will be called as a proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which is a severe form of diabetic retinopathy. So you can have neovascularizations on the disc, you can have neovascularization elsewhere, you can have pre-retinal or vitreous hemorrhage, you can have fibrovascular proliferation, which will progress to tractional retinal detachment. So all these things will qualify as a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So you can see florid new vessels, okay, in the retina. Look at them just growing into the vitreous. These are all new vessels induced by hypoxia, hyperglycemia causing vascular endothelial growth factor release, and all this damage is done to the retina. It's in front of the disc. And vitreous hemorrhage, nothing but hemorrhage in the vitreous. This can be pre-retinal, intravitreal, or both. Pre-retinal means in front of the retina, between the vitreous and the retina. So pre-retinal is basically unclotted. Takes a boat-shaped appearance, whereas if it is within the vitreous gel, it is a clotted appearance. And if it is an old vitreous hemorrhage, it has got a chicken fat appearance. So what are the causes for vitreous hemorrhage? Vitreous hemorrhage is due to diabetes mellitus. It can be due to retinal tears. It can be due to posterior vitreous detachment. It can be due to central retinal vein occlusion. It can occur in Eales disease, sickle cell disease, or because of trauma. So these are some various causes for your vitreous hemorrhage. It could be diabetes mellitus, retinal tears, posterior vitreous detachment, central retinal vein occlusion, Eales disease, sickle cell disease, and also trauma. So this is a vitreous gel. You can vitreous hemorrhage. So you can see this in the gel, and it has got a clotted appearance. Okay, it is in a gel form and a clotted appearance. This is a boat-shaped hemorrhage. This is a pre-retinal hemorrhage. Look at the boat-shaped. There is a upper horizontal layer because of the blood seeping down. So this is tractional retinal detachment because of the fibrovascular proliferation. So you can see the detached retina. So I'd like to remind you about the diabetic retinopathy classification once again. Stage 1, you don't have any microvascular abnormalities. There are no abnormalities related to diabetic retinopathy. So that's the stage when you have no diabetic retinopathy. Next one, you have only microaneurysms, which is classified under mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And if in addition to the microaneurysms, if you are going to have retinal dot and blot hemorrhages, hard exudates or cottonwool spots, but no signs of severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, it is called as moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And if you have the 4:2:1 rule, that is more than 20 intraretinal hemorrhages in each of the 4 quadrants, a definite venous bleeding in 1, 2 or more quadrants, and prominent intraretinal microvascular abnormalities in 1 quadrant. So hemorrhages in 4 quadrants, venous bleeding in 2 quadrants, and intraretinal microvascular abnormalities in 1 quadrant, then you classify it as a severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And when do you call it as a proliferative diabetic retinopathy? When you have neovascularization either in the disc or elsewhere in the retina. When you have vitreous or pre-retinal hemorrhage, it is classified as proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So you can have no changes, you can have mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, or proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So what are the investigations you are going to do in a patient with diabetic retinopathy? The first thing is, first and foremost, is to check the visual acuity of the patient, and this will give you an idea of what is the current condition. So you have to record the visual acuity of the patient, and this will give you an idea of what the visual acuity is, and you can follow up whether the visual acuity is improving or decreasing for your when you begin the treatment. Then intraocular pressure. Glaucoma has got an association with diabetic retinopathy, so you need to measure the intraocular pressure to rule out whether the patient has got either open angle glaucoma, and one another glaucoma which is associated with diabetic retinopathy is your neovascular glaucoma. Primary open angle glaucoma has got a strong association with diabetes mellitus. Similarly, you can also get neovascular glaucoma in diabetic patients. And if needed, fields also can be done for these patients. Then you need to do a dilated fundus examination, which is better done with a 90 diopter lens or indirect ophthalmoscopy, which will give you a stereoscopic view of the fundus. And then you can do a fundus photo for your recording purpose, so that future you'll be able to get back and see what is a thing like, what is a picture like, whether there is any progression. Then you have fundus fluorescent angiography, fluorescent dye is injected through a vein and it makes its appearance in the retina, and all the lesions are highlighted. That is fundus fluorescent angiography and also optical coherence tomography. So this is a fundus fluorescent angiography. You can see the microaneurysms well highlighted. These are the microaneurysms which are standing out. This is a fundus fluorescent angiography picture of a non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Here you can see there is a gross leakage from vessels. New vessels usually leak. So this is a picture of a fundus fluorescent angiography in a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Look at the leakage here. There is a gross leakage from the vessels. So that is proliferative diabetic retinopathy. This is an optical coherence tomography picture showing clinically significant macular edema in a patient with diabetes mellitus. So what are the risk factors for diabetic retinopathy? The main thing is a poor glycemic control. Hyperglycemia, hypoxia both contribute to release of vascular endothelial growth factor, which has been implicated as a main causative agent for your diabetic retinopathy. If you have associated hypertension, it is going to worsen the development and progress of diabetic retinopathy. Increased triglycerides, low density lipoproteins, microalbuminuria, anemia, pregnancy, cataract extraction also can favor progression of your diabetic retinopathy. All these things are going to increase the risk of progression of diabetic retinopathy. So what is the schedule for a diabetic retinopathy screening? So if the patient is a type 1 diabetes mellitus, you can do it 5 years after diagnosis or at puberty, whichever is earlier. In non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus patient, you have to do it at the time of diagnosis because you do not know when they actually got the disease. They might have incidentally checked up and found that they are having the non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, and every year thereafter you have to do the screening. So if they do not have any manifestations of diabetic retinopathy, or if they have a mild non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you have to do an yearly screening for these patients. And in moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you have to do a 6-monthly screening. And if it is a severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, depending on the status, you have to do it 2 to 3 months. And if it is very severe, you may have to do it even earlier. And in PDR, you have to do a monthly schedule, and depending on the response, you can then decide what schedule you wanted. So why do you want to screen for diabetic retinopathy? It is very, very important because diabetes mellitus is one of the risk factors for visual loss. Okay, so diabetes mellitus is going to induce a diabetic retinopathy, and if you are not going to detect it in a correct time, it is going to land up with visual loss. I have seen people 40 years, 45 years who have had proliferative diabetic retinopathy in both eyes and come at an end stage when they are almost lost the vision, and it's very difficult to go in and intervene at the stage and give them useful vision. So it's very important that we screen these patients at the right time. The person may be your relative or anyone else known to you. The idea is for you to see that all diabetic patients are screened. Okay, it is very, very important for them to do a screening and identify whether they have got diabetic retinopathy and prevent it from going for a worse complication. It's very important. So you have to stick on to the schedule for diabetic retinopathy screening. Most patients are not aware of the implications of a diabetic retinopathy. I mean, they're not aware that diabetes can cause such a devastating visual loss in the eye, and even if they are aware, they don't come for proper screening, which is also very important. It is very important for us to emphasize that it's the importance of a diabetic retinopathy screening. So coming to the treatment, the medical treatment is very, very important, more important than all of you might think. It's very important to have a very good metabolic control. It's very important. It's mandatory that the patient should have a good metabolic control before you go for further procedures to manage the diabetic retinopathy. And you could also give intravitreal steroids or anti-VEGF compounds or VEGF inhibitors. Lasers play a major role in diabetic retinopathy. For diabetic macular edema, you can do a focal photocoagulation. For example, if there is a leaking microaneurysms, you could go in and target it with laser, and that will prevent the leakage. Or you could do a grid laser photocoagulation for diabetic macular edema. For proliferative diabetic retinopathy, you have to do a pan-retinal photocoagulation. So pan-retinal photocoagulation is you're knocking off peripheral retina with lasers and trying to save only the central retinal area so that the patient will have a tubular vision. The idea is when you apply laser to the peripheral retina, hypoxic stimulus, the retina will not demand more oxygen. So you are converting the hypoxic peripheral retina into an anoxic retina so that then the demand for oxygen will go down, and thereby there will not be any new vessel formation. That is the idea with which you are doing a pan-retinal photocoagulation, where you are actually knocking off the entire peripheral retina so that you are able to have some vision by preserving the central retina. And if the patient has got a vitreous hemorrhage, you will observe for 4 to 6 months, and if it's not clearing, you will have to do a pars plana vitrectomy. So what are the anti-vascular endothelial growth factor drugs that we are using? Pegactinib sodium, it's an aptamer which goes by the commercial name of Macugen. It binds to your vascular endothelial growth factor 165 isomer. Then you have monoclonal antibodies which are directed against vascular endothelial growth factor. You have bevacizumab, which is not FDA approved, but it's more of an off-label use that we are using bevacizumab, which is because it is cost effective. And you have ranibizumab, which is FDA approved. It is more specific kind of protein, but it's a bit costlier. So both these are monoclonal antibodies which are directed against your vascular endothelial growth factor. Then you have aflibercept, which is a fusion protein directed against the vascular endothelial growth factor receptor and preventing the activation of the receptor. It goes by the commercial name of Eylea. In addition to that, you have got a lot of steroids as well. Triamcinolone acetonide, dexamethasone implants, fluocinolone implants, all those things. All these drugs are given intravitreally into the eye. The usual dosage is around 0.05 ml, and you have to maintain a strict asepsis because endophthalmitis is one of the complications associated with anti-VEGF drugs. These are usually given at intervals of monthly intervals, and they are followed up with OCTs, which are nothing but optical coherence tomography. So that will tell you whether there is any improvement or not. So this is a picture of a pan-retinal photocoagulation. What you see here are the laser marks in the periphery of the retina. Almost this entire periphery of the retina is knocked off so that you save the central vision. So the take-home message is all diabetic patients have to be screened for diabetic retinopathy yearly so that you can pick up the complications at an earlier stage and prevent its progression to visual loss. It's very, very important to inform patients that they are supposed to do a diabetic retinopathy screening, and only if they are recognized early we can prevent the development of complications like sight-threatening visual complications, so that they do not land up with visual loss later on. So it's very important to do a dilated fundus examination to pick up a diabetic retinopathy. It's very important. Without a dilated fundus examination, you cannot pick up a diabetic retinopathy. This dilated fundus examination can be done by the ophthalmologist. And nowadays you have got lots of fundus cameras and software also where you can do the screening even in the periphery, and that can be sent across to the ophthalmologist for diagnosis and proceeding later on. So the take-home message is all diabetic patients should undergo diabetic retinopathy screening yearly to prevent the development of life-threatening complications, because most patients do not turn up for screening properly. Many patients are not aware of it initially, and once they are aware, they do not turn up for screening as well. So it's very important that all of you insist that whomever you know who is a diabetic, turn up for screening so that they are guarded from this severe complication. Thank you.